Hi, it's Dr. Brian McDonough. Welcome to the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. It has been said that healthcare might be at one of the critical junctures in its history. Lots of challenges, a time for leaders. Some of the best leaders in healthcare, it only makes sense, are physicians. In fact, physicians lead some of the best organizations in healthcare, and we need more. But how do you train a physician who obviously dedicates their life to treating people, to become an executive, to have an understanding of business operations? It's not that easy. Well, now there is a new book to help physicians who want to become leaders learn those skills. The book is called Healthcare Administration and Leadership and Management, or HAM, The Essentials. And it is edited by Dr. Daniel Handel, who is going to be my guest on the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. He is the Vice President and Chief Medical Officer for the Central Area of Atrium Health, part of Advocate Health in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a clinical professor of emergency medicine at Wake Forest University. I met Dan when he asked me to write one chapter on health informatics for this textbook.
All of us in physician leadership, myself included, kind of basically got on-the-job training over many, many years, right? And I think in contrast to all of our respective clinical specialties where we came out of med school, we did a residency, possibly a fellowship, we all kind of stumbled into physician leadership in one way or another. And some of us got MHA, some of us got MBAs, some of us just kind of learned on the job, or a combination of all of the above. So I think it's the ACGME realized, okay, let's kind of draw a line in the sand and say, okay, we're going to articulate and define what are core competencies in physician leadership development, and then work with institutions across the country to develop a fellowship program. It'll be really interesting. The book just came out in April, and it'll be really interesting to hear from people who are planning on taking the exam in November of this year, kind of those who get the book, how it's helped them. And I think the most important thing is, and the reason we actually were very intentional on calling it the first edition, is that this is not a one and done. We want to learn from the people taking the exam to say, okay, how do we make this better? How do we stay up to date with the latest content? Also, as the core content that ACGME uses evolves over time, how does the book morph to meet that, and it becomes a continuous setting of improvement in terms of the knowledge base for this exam.
And of course, I got to meet you through an organization called the American Association of Physician Leadership, which is actually a group which helps nourish and train physicians who want to be leaders. And it was through them and through ACGME and your leadership where people more or less have gotten together and said, we want to formalize this, as you said. And you were kind enough to ask me to write a chapter on health information technology, because that was kind of one of the areas where I was involved in a leadership role, instituting electronic medical records in my hospital system. And it's interesting when you're writing for that perspective, it makes you think, wow, I had this battle, that battle, this battle, and kind of had to learn on the job.
Right.
Well, exactly. It would be nice just to have somebody say, this is what you might anticipate having to do.
No, and it's a fair point, right? I mean, it's hard when you do this type of work to say, okay, this is the end all be all of knowledge. And I think part of the appeal of doing physician leadership, there's always going to be new challenges, similar to how the science of our clinical specialties evolves over time. So the question is, how do we approach it with the same academic rigor, saying, okay, I need to learn more about finances or marketing principles or payer evolution over time, or what are the market forces that are causing us to get to this, or really being rigorous about things like quality and safety, which is kind of a core tenet of what most physician leaders are involved with. So really kind of having that discipline and having that continuous learning mindset of, okay, I'm going to get the basic knowledge, I'm going to start getting into my first leadership role, and then how do I get very intentional as my experience grows, my knowledge base continues to grow and evolve to match that. Because you're right. I mean, I made the same mistakes everyone else did my first couple of years as a medical director, then as a CMO, and I'm sure I'll just make different mistakes moving forward. But hopefully, they're more nuanced as time goes on.
And I did mention AAPL, and the reason I mentioned that organization too is they actually have weekend and 4-day sessions where you can go and get fully involved in courses as well. But this book, I think it's something you can have on your own. You can read, you can go through it, and it really goes through all these different aspects of leadership in numerous areas. And I think that's what's really good about it. I want to ask you a question too, for people who don't necessarily want to become physician leaders, but just want to be leaders.
Right.
I mentioned initially that you're an emergency room physician and you're a doctor, you're practicing, and then you get in this role where you're a chief medical officer and clearly are helping lead other physicians and work on things like quality and those issues. What brought you into it?
No, it's interesting. My dad was a healthcare administrator, not clinical, MBA by training background, and typical of most teenagers, I didn't quite understand what he did. Right, and I was like, oh, he goes and sits in some office and meets with people. And obviously, this was the age of pre-internet. So I don't want to do that. I actually want to do something to help people. So it was kind of adjacent to what he was doing, and so I was in a combined degree program through Northwestern. And so went to med school and thought I wanted to be cardiologist or surgeon, and realized I just didn't have the attention span to do rounds that long or be in the OR that long. And so I liked the variety and the quick pace of emergency medicine and went into that. Did that. Met my wife in med school, who's a pediatrician, and we couple smashed in Cincinnati, which was a great combination for both pediatrics and emergency medicine. And then thought I wanted to be a health services researcher. Went out to Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, and about 6 months into my research fellowship, my chair at the time, a guy named Jairus Hedges, said, hey, we're going live with this thing called Epic. You want to help us with it? And it was right around that time I realized chasing grants for the rest of my career probably was not what I wanted to do. And so got into informatics, went through an Epic Go Live. I've now gone through 2 subsequent Go Live since then. And that really led to me, it wasn't as much informatics, but really how do you design operations with an electronic health record tool. Became an ED medical director and did that for many years, and said, I really want to figure out, because ED boarding was and continues to be a challenge, how do I get upstream to really look at how do we improve patient throughput, patient logistics, and was fortunate to do my first CMO role in 2014, and I've been doing various roles since then. So that was kind of the path. In some twist of fate, I actually went into something very similar to what my dad went into, even though I took a much more roundabout way to get there.
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that, because obviously I mentioned I was involved in similar, first with Cerner and then with Epic, going through 2 Go Lives. And what I learned too, and you kind of threw it in there, I explained it to people, you begin to understand the entire operations of an organization through it. For instance, my view as a physician was, patient was in the ICU, we were moving them to the floor. I thought they magically got to the floor. They were there. I saw them there and took care of them. Once we started doing it electronically, I'm like, wait a minute, a nurse has to be with them. There has to be a monitor.
Right.
Not only does there have to be a monitor, but somebody has to clean the room. Somebody has to prepare. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just said, how come they're not here already? What's the problem? Right. And it gives you a totally different view. And I do not ever want to run a hospital. But what I learned is you could, because you've seen every aspect of that key word, operations.
Yeah, and it's and the informatics side, right? Everything's a process map. So you're like, okay, this is how we did it in the legacy system, or when we were on paper, if you're going to an EHR the first time. And so you really get visual about, kind of to your point, how a patient moves from one location to another. Now, the other nice thing too is, once you do that, then you're like, okay, is this the best way to do it, right? And then you suddenly start getting into process improvement, and really then the electronic health record is not the end all be all. It's just a tool for process improvement and improving operations. And I think, not to go too far down the informatics thing, but I think, we're only scratching the surface of what we can do with electronic health records and really leveraging them. I mean, I think really the past decade or so has been an emphasis on implementation of electronic health records. Now the question will be, how do we really optimize it and use it as a tool, AI, everything really kind of streamlining, how do we actually make the experience both better for patients, but also just as important for clinicians? Well, I mean, you mentioned the APL. I think it's a phenomenal organization. Its sole purpose is for physician leadership development. And the nice thing is, actually, when you're a med student or resident, I think I would have to look at details. It's very cheap, if not free. So it's a great way to kind of get involved and really just kind of learn what's out there. And it's the nice thing, it's for anyone in any specialty. You don't have to be one specialty to do it or not. And you really get a landscape of what are the things that you can do as a physician, and really kind of use your unique skill set, your unique training, your unique perspective to really positively impact healthcare. And the literature is very clear. The more we have physician leaders running hospitals, running organizations, the better the outcomes. And we talk about that in the preface of the textbook. Is you look at the top U.S. News and World Report hospitals, those at top of CMS, the star ratings, those at top of Leapfrog. The majority of them have physician leaders at the helm, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So, obviously, I would also, as you get involved, if you're a med student, don't know what your specialty is, just things like the American Medical Student Association, the AMA. As you get into your specialty societies, look at what kind of leadership development there are. But remember, those specialty societies are focused just on the specialty. But really, if you want to get to a higher specialty agnostic level, things like the AAP are a great opportunity. I did the certified physician executive. It's a great thing to do, even if you have an MHA or an MBA already. And then, really figure out, okay, is the fellowship right for me? I mean, depending on where you're at in your training, the fellowships, I think, are only going to continue to grow in number over time.
The book is Healthcare Administration, Leadership and Management, HUM, The Essentials. It's available Amazon, really anywhere you can get a book. It's out there. And Dan Handel has been my guest. It's been a great having you with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it.
And when you asked me to write a chapter, I thought, oh no, a chapter, but you've made it so easy. You guided us through it. And I can only imagine when you have like all these different contributors with all their schedules, it was probably crazy, but you somehow pulled it off. And
I learned so much from you and others. I mean, I just love reading the chapters, and this is a work in progress. We intentionally called it the first edition for a reason, where this is not a one and done. We're going to continue to update this. So you'll be hearing from me in all too soon future, Brian, of what's the next iteration of informatics of the chapter. And then we'll continue as we get feedback from people reading the book, as people take the exam saying, okay, yeah, this helped me in the exam this way, or this is what we're missing. We want people to give us feedback so we can make it the best publication possible.
Well, Dr. Dan Handel, thanks for joining me on the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. Thanks to all of you for watching or listening to this. Obviously, please subscribe if you find it interesting, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you so much.